On today's episode of the Going Commando podcast, we have our first installment of the NFC East Roundtable. Ahead of the 2023 season, we will be previewing the Philadelphia Eagles and bringing on a special guest, Brass, to give us all sorts of insight into what the Birds are looking like this season. So stay tuned, buckle up. We've got a good show. Let's get this thing started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Going Commando podcast. My name is Clark. I'm with my co-hosts Tom and Chris, and we welcome on a new face to the program. He's a contributor for the Bleeding Green Nation blog, a diehard Eagles fan. It is Jacob, otherwise known and more commonly referred to as Brass. So Brass, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, Clark. Absolute pleasure.
And so right off the bat, I'm going to ask you about a subject that you might not enjoy talking about. Of course, being a diehard Eagles fan, you watched your team unfortunately lose the Super Bowl in what was a really great game. It played in Arizona last year. Maybe some questions about the turf. I'm sure maybe you can get into that as we discuss. But just to start things off, how do you think the team is looking and feeling after, kind of a disappointing end to the season?
I think kind of everyone's outlook going into the end of the season was the Eagles are going to lose all of these key contributors. This is their one shot to win the Super Bowl. After this, they're just going to fall apart and go back. But Howie really stepped up his game this offseason. Arguably, the team got almost better from where they were last year, especially around the offensive side of the ball. So I think they're going to keep moving forward. This is a new Philadelphia Eagles philosophy. We're going to forget about that atrocious field, and they're going to take this season by storm.
Yeah, Brass, it's nice to meet you for the first time. I was kind of milling this question over in my head, and obviously I've gone back and looked at the film a little bit, and you aren't aware of this, but I want to know, was it pass interference?
100%. It was. James Bradbury tweeted it too. I mean, it's a part of the sport. The ref made the correct call, and it sucks that it came at the most crucial moment, but it's just a part of the game. You have a short memory when you're a DB. It's the hardest position on the field.
So then, was Jalen Hurts really to blame for this Super Bowl? It seems that he has been making some comments to his team that he was wanting them to take, to give all of the blame to him for that fumble. What do you think about that?
Kind of how you see what the Eagles did this offseason too, I think really speaks to what contributed to that loss. I mean, there's two big losses of the season. One was to the Commanders when the Eagles were undefeated, the other in the Super Bowl. And both games came down to they lost the trenches. Defensive line wasn't getting it done. The run game wasn't great on offense, and they lost with the big boys up front. And that's what their philosophy was moving into this season. I think that's what you got to give the blame to for the Super Bowl.
Brass, yeah, great to have you on the show, my man. Good to see you. As always. What are your thoughts? Because kind of going off what you said earlier, this defense scares me. And I'm saying that as a Commanders fan, and I as a Commanders fan that feels that our defense is pretty stout, or at least has the potential to be very, very competitive in the league. But I gotta say, out of all the defenses, in the NFC East, yours might be the most complete. Do you feel the same way? And kind of, I think a lot of that is contributing to bringing back so many guys and just like adding on that. But what are your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. I was surprised they were able to bring back as many pieces as they could. I thought Slay and Bradbury, potentially both, were going to be out the door with them trying to sign CJ Gardner-Johnson. But having them back is going to be a major contributor to the defense. The other big loss is Javon Hargrave. He contributed 11 sacks last year. So when you lose a guy that's putting up double-digit numbers, it's going to leave a massive hole. And I thought they weren't going to be able to replace that. But somehow Jalen Carter just fell into their laps in the draft. And this dude has been absolutely killing it in training camp for everything we can see. He only had one snap in the first preseason game against the Ravens, and it led to a sack. So it looks like they might have that hole filled that they thought they were going to have. Jordan Davis coming back from an injury is looking pretty good too. And then the other big addition is Sidney Brown with the 3rd round in the draft. I was huge on this guy watching his tape in college. He was also a Red Star player from the Philadelphia Scouts. So he was a guy they loved. And early prediction, he's going to be an Eagles fan favorite. He's going to be a problem for the Commanders in the NFC East for a while. He reminds me a lot of what Brian Dawkins used to be back in the day, just strong everywhere on the football field. If the ball's in play, he's somehow near it. He's going to be a menace to offenses across the league. Probably won't be a starter week 1, but I say around week 10, he'll be there.
Well, one of the things that you do bring up there, Brass, and I think it's an interesting point for us to touch on, is that you do have such a young team. I mean, we were talking earlier about it. The veteran presence, I mean, except for the guys who are key to this team and who have kind of led this team for years at this point, the veteran presence is kind of lacking, and you have a lot of young guys, a lot of guys who come from other teams. You got to make them all fit. And I wonder, taking yourself out of the shoes of a fan for a minute and kind of trying to be an analyst of football, do you think that this team exceeds expectations? I mean, obviously the expectations are very high for you guys coming off of last season. We talked about you guys being the golden boy team of the NFC East. Do you think that we're putting too much expectations on these young guys and maybe they're going to falter a little bit? Or do you think that they're ready to step up to bat, so to speak?
Yeah, I definitely think that's, a fair thing to bring up. And to exceed expectation, I think it's going to be hard this season because I think they're going to be higher than they were before. But I think they're going to take some time to get into the rhythm and figure out where these younger pieces fit in. And I think when they do, they're going to be a formidable team. And luckily, the start of their season isn't looking too hard, but there's definitely a middle to the end stretch where they're going to need them to figure out their roles. And Nick Sirianni preaches all the time. You just have to do your role, no more, no less. And that's what they're going to do. Nick Sirianni's great about assigning those roles and being very transparent to both the public and the team about what their jobs are. And it's awesome to have a lot of young faces and on the team that are going to be here for a while. We have a good outlook for not just this year, but for the future. And Jalen Hurts is paid, so we don't have to worry about that. So that's also a great thing to have.
Jalen Hurts may be paid. And you mentioned that, they were able to bring back some of these guys despite, giving the quarterback a big contract and despite having guys that were on expiring deals. But I mean, let's not forget that there are some key, departures with this team, notably CJ Gardner-Johnson, Javon Hargrave, as you mentioned as well. And also let's not forget that your running back room is looking quite different as well, with Miles Sanders, who, I know has been one of your favorite players for a long time, had probably the best season of his career last year, but, ends up going down to Carolina. They bring in Swift. So, how do you think his production is going to be able to be replaced?
Yeah, I was a huge Boobie Sanders fan. It was really tough to see him go, but the cardinal sin in the NFL right now is you don't pay the running back, and the Eagles followed that rule and sent him on his way. But I still think the production is going to be there. I think one of the biggest things that helped Sanders' production this season was Jalen Hurts developed as a runner, and the offensive line was so strong when you have to be on your heels a little bit as a linebacker just in case Jalen Hurts is going to pull the ball and go. It gives a running back an advantage, at least by one step, and that makes a huge difference. So I think really no matter who you put into the Eagles' backfield, they're going to be set up for pretty good success. The thing I like about having Swift, Penny, and Gainwell being the main guys now is felt like last year they were all good at the same type of running and all good at the same type of plays. Now you have a little bit more of a changeup. You have guys that have different strengths and you can use them in different ways. It's just gonna come down to Sirianni not showing his cards and being able to hide what some of those plays might be.
Oh, I mean, and you talk about these plays, and I think one of the departures that we sort of forget, even as diehards like ourselves, for the Commanders, is that you guys lost both your offensive and defensive coordinator to head coaching positions. You will have new people step into those roles. They will be obviously taking on a lot of pressure, especially given what the team had last year. So I'm kind of wondering, where do you sit on the new OC and DC? Do you think that, there's going to be some hiccups along the way? Are these guys from the system who are just going to be able to, plug in just like that? Or is this more of like a, give them a game or two, they're going to have it figured out by week 5 at the latest?
Yeah, losing the DC, Jonathan Gannon was a tricky way to go. There was definitely a lot of controversy around that of how he left with a little bit of early communication. Was he 100% focused on the Super Bowl? So that one's tough, but Sean Desai is going to be a good DC, I think. He's got a lot of good athletes on the team. Only big concern is at linebacker. So I don't think there'll be too much of a mix up there. He runs a pretty similar style to Gannon. Only hope is that he's going to be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to blitzing, especially with Dean taking up the starting role, definitely known as a blitzer in college. So really hope that we see a lot more of that. Brian Johnson, I'm less worried about. Shane Steichen was a fantastic OC. I think he's going to be wonderful with the Colts, especially paired with Richardson having a similar style of QB. So that hurts, but Brian Johnson has a history with Jalen Hurts. He was with him all the way back to high school. He knows Jalen Hurts very, very well, and he's very comfortable with his style of play. So I think that's going to be a really seamless transition there. And I don't think the offense is going to miss a beat, especially when you factor in all the weapons that he has still of AJ Brown and Devonta Smith and Goddard. It's going to be a similar style to what we saw last year. Only question to me is, are they going to try to protect their $1 million quarterback now that he has this deal? Is running going to be a little bit of a concern of if they don't want to lose him, especially when we've seen Mariota play this preseason?
So you're not too high on the Mariota signing? Because, I mean, I feel like everybody, when he got signed, was saying, oh, this is the perfect backup for Jalen Hurts.
I was saying the exact same thing too, but throughout training camp in the first 2 preseason games, we've seen him consistently miss wide open targets by at least 10 yards. And maybe it's preseason. He's 6-8 year veteran. He might not care as much, but if someone's open, you got to hit them. You just got to give the receivers a chance to make a play. And he's just looked bad. He's looked good with his legs. He's ran well, but if Hurts goes down for more than 2 weeks, we're going to need a little bit more than running well.
Yeah, and also having watched a little bit of that quarterback series, it kind of felt like a Hard Knocks spinoff or something. It was one of the ones that they followed on that, and I think he looked good in some episodes, and in some other episodes, maybe not. So, y'all needed to get a guy in there, obviously, though, with some veteran experience. It's good to have a guy like in the room there with Hurts. So I think that makes sense. Something I saw in the news this week, actually, that was kind of weird. Thoughts on Miles Jack? Just calling it quits, hanging up the cleats just a couple weeks here before kickoff. I mean, I guess that clears up who's going to kind of make the team and kind of be doing what in terms of your linebacker position. But yeah, what was up with that?
Yeah, linebackers definitely just the biggest hole for the Eagles right now, and something that needs to be addressed. I think it's going to happen again before week 1 of Nakobe Dean said he's the #1 guy, but he's still a question mark. We haven't seen him take a full-time role in the NFL. There's a lot of questions about drafting him, if he's too small to tackle some of the bigger running backs, and those still haven't been addressed. We still haven't seen him. So is all up in the air how he's going to play. And then behind him, right now, the best guy is looking like it's going to be Christian Ellis, who was an undrafted free agent. And Nicholas Morrow has shown nothing. So was excited to see them bring in both Zach Cunningham and Miles Jack. And was especially excited about Jack having so much praise coming out of college. But he just couldn't make a play in training camp, never really stood out. He started with the starting lineup, but slowly was moved to the second team, and then was getting a lot of reps with the third team in the preseason's game. So I think he just decided he's doesn't quite have the juice anymore. And rumor has it he's actually going to go to plumber school. So he's going to have a new career as a plumber. So
I saw
hope
that.
goes well for him, and wish Jack the best there.
Hey, to each their own. He got his bag, and now he wants to pursue his dreams, or at least a new challenge, right? So
So now
know.
we can truly say that Tom Brady was playing against plumbers in his career and is a fraudulent goat. Anyways.
I mean, hey, everyone has a pipe dream, but one of the things that I do want to touch on, and we kind of have touched on this slightly, is the NFL draft. You guys do hit on a lot of these picks, in my opinion. I definitely think that you guys made maybe the splash of the draft at the 30th overall pick, taking Nolan Smith, a guy who seemed for literally months going into this that he was going to be a top 10 guy. I mean, you get Jalen Carter, who obviously there's his issues legally, which I am becoming more aware of the severity of them, given my school days now. You get Nolan Smith, as you talked about. You get Sidney Brown in the third round. You even get a quarterback in Tanner McKee to kind of fill up the Gardner Minshew hole in maybe some of the deeper fan eyes. So I'm just kind of wondering, coming out of this draft, I mean, obviously, I think it's a hit for you. Do you believe that it's a home run?
I would absolutely say it's a home run, even when you look at some of the undrafted free agents they got out of it too. I mean, Nolan Smith and Sidney Brown are just guys with insane motors. No one should have that much juice in them. The last preseason game, Nolan Smith hurt his shoulder and he refused to leave to play special teams play. Who does that? Like, no one in the NFL does that, especially when you're drafted in the first round. You're not going to fight to stay in for special teams play despite being hurt. But that's just the type of personality he is. He loves football and just wants to be on the field. And you can't get enough of those players on a roster because those are the guys like Brandon Graham that just bring the juice to a team. And I'm excited to have them taking in those roles in a couple of years here once those older fellows retire. I think Tanner McKee should have been the first QB taken after seeing these preseason games. He's been electric. There is now a quarterback controversy for who's going to be number two, with Mariota not playing well, Tanner McKee absolutely lighting up. It's going to be interesting to see.
No, it's good that you also mentioned, how important, those guys that are maybe undrafted can be, or guys that are like lower level draft picks. I mean, you never know, a lot of those guys, when they do kind of latch onto a team, I feel like they end up being on the team, for years and years, and perhaps one of their kind of core guys that they don't really move on from. So you can always find a diamond in the rough there, and so obviously time will tell if it was a home run or not. But definitely looking like off to a solid start for sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I do want to touch on here, and you kind of brought it up, is preseason. I mean, and we obviously are coming off of a rather large win for the Commanders, which is a weird thing to say in preseason. I got to be honest, even as a fan, it's hard for me to say it. Where we snapped this streak with the Ravens, and obviously the Eagles have been having an interesting preseason, to be sure. Something that is at least worth watching if you're a fan, not if only just because it doesn't matter necessarily for you guys, but more just because you have some interesting position battles going on. So I'm wondering, when you as an Eagles fan, when you look at this, are you seeing it as a preview of the season, or do you see this as purely positional battles?
Yeah, I feel like in the past when the Eagles might not have been projected to be as good as they are, it was definitely more of seeing it as a projection for the future of how are the guys playing. But I feel like when you're coming off of the Super Bowl and you have another good outlook onto the season, it really does come down to those positional battles. If even the roster spots are going to be between 46 and 53 of who are the guys we are going to be able to keep that can develop to keep the longevity of this success and to make a contribution on the team. It's been interesting to watch. Past week of training camp obviously has not been great with the Colts, with a couple of hiccups here and there, but especially at the cornerback position, which has been notorious flaw of the Eagles for many years. They got a lot of good guys. They got Eli Ricks as an undrafted free agent, Mekhi Gardner, Josh Jobe from last year, as well as Joe Scott, which they can't keep all those guys. They've been playing pretty decent for them, and it's going to be interesting to see which ones actually get to make the rosters, because I feel like those are some guys that are going to get picked up off of waivers if they don't put them on the roster. Those guys that might not be able to keep on the practice squad.
Speaking of that scuffle that took place at the Colts camp this week, Jason Kelsey of all players was the guy that kind of was making the headlines, of maybe stepping out of line, when he was having that altercation with the Colts player. So, seeing that coming from a guy like Jason Kelsey in practice in the preseason, nonetheless, is that something that, excites you, that he's still getting fired up, or, hey, maybe take it easy a little bit. Everybody thought you were going to retire after last year. We know this is going to be your last season. Does he kind of need to chill out?
I think, especially where they are right now, it's important to really just not make this. I guess it's just a stupid mistake. You can't make those stupid mistakes where the position they are right now, because last year they were the team that had everything to prove. They wanted to show the whole league that they shouldn't be discounted because they have a young quarterback, or that Jalen Hurts can't throw the ball. They wanted to make a statement, and they were very much the hunters. This year, they are going to be the hunted. They've seen it with the Browns and the Colts for their first two training camps. The Browns came in and tried to punch them in the face the very first day of practice. And then again with the Colts, they were getting chippy. They wanted to prove they were better than the Super Bowl contenders. And teams aren't going to stop doing that. They're going to continue to be the aggressors. And if you respond, it doesn't matter if they had a late hit. If you're the one to hit after the play again, you're the one getting flagged. And those are the stupid mistakes that could cost the Eagles another Super Bowl run. And especially being the veteran of the team, we can't have that. The first fight was caused by Derek Barnett, and that is an absolute can't happen, because that's what he's notorious for throughout his entire career. I swear he has more personal fouls than he does sacks. Guys like that can't be causing these fights in practice. They've got to keep their composure and be the better team at that point.
Famous University of Tennessee volunteer Derek Barnett, who actually was the man who I believe he broke Reggie White's sack record at Tennessee. And it's very interesting that you bring up that name, because we kind of talked about before show, and I don't want to get too much into it, but the Eagles are a team who have hit on drafts more recently, whereas in the past, you have guys like Jalen Reagor, and you have a guy like Derek Barnett, who, he does make impact. He does have an impact on the game when he's in, but to quantify that's almost kind of hard, because it's maybe 15 plays of 80 defensive plays. So I'm wondering, do you think that, the process of drafting has become more important to the Eagles? One, and then do you think that would be the direct line if you were to try and figure out from how they went from where they were to being a successful franchise?
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily the draft has become more important. I would say we've seen a lot more maturity from Howie, especially after he was fired back before the Chip Kelly era that Eagles fans hope to forget. And coming out of that, when he was rehired to be the GM, was some mistakes with Jalen Reagor, but the past year and a half, 2 years, we've seen a lot more just keeping it simple. Don't overthink what the draft is. You're bringing in new talent for the team. So go get the guys from Georgia, go get the guys from Alabama and Clemson, all these good schools that constantly produce fantastic players. Have that be your focus. That's where you should be looking to get talent. And that's what they've been doing the past couple of years. We have all the memes of the Philadelphia Bulldogs and all of that, but it makes sense. All these players are great, and they're going to continue to be great when they move to the NFL, because they've been going against good competition. They've proven themselves in these tough schools. And so keep it simple. Don't overthink it. They completely overthought it with Jalen Reagor, and look at the disaster that turned into.
Yeah, I agree. Teams should definitely look to draft guys from, one particular SEC school. I've never heard that before. It's not like the Washington Commanders
like
have
we do that.
drafted. Yeah, no. It's not. We have never just like drafted 3 defensive linemen from Alabama in the first 2 rounds in the span of like 4 years. Never happened.
It's actually more than that, I think, even. You got people forget about Ryan Anderson was the second round pick.
True. I was going more towards Fedarian Mathis.
And Mathis, well, he was
there.
also obviously second round pick, but you got,
Yep. Obviously, Alan
another,
Payne.
yeah, but you got a sneaky one in there.
People forget Sean Dion Hamilton.
Well, B-Rob, well, he's third round, third round though, but we like Bama.
Guys like Cam Sims or something like that.
Right. Well, he's back to what I was saying
Listen.
earlier about undrafted legends. I mean,
I mean, and I don't know if you guys saw, he had a touchdown in the preseason game for the Raiders.
yeah.
So,
I
don't sleep.
I did see that. And we're all very happy for him.
Makes that roster.
So, Brass, we've talked a lot about, last year and the additions going into this year and even preseason. But I think one of the things that we've stuck to is how do they make it back to the Super Bowl? And I think one of the biggest things they have to look at is their regular season schedule. Now, I heard that you actually have an interesting note for us with this regard, and you kind of, hinted at it earlier in the show, but I think it's really something that our fans would be interested to hear. So why don't you tell us your take?
Yeah, I think the biggest advantage the rest of the NFC East has over the Eagles is the Eagles are not playing easy teams, and they've got some hard stretches in their schedule. And I think this season for the division's going to come down to 2 to 3 games of difference in terms of who's going to be number 1 and who's going to be number 3. And the Eagles have a stretch. They play at Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, then go back to Philly to play the Dolphins, go to the Commanders to play. Then they play Cowboys at Chiefs, Bills, 49ers at Cowboys. That's not easy. And that's probably going to be the defining stretch for the Eagles' schedule this year. If they can walk away with a winning record in that series, it's going to look good, but it's a very likely and potential possibility that they lose a lot of those games, especially the ones that are away. And that's going to be tricky. It's going to be really hard, and they're going to face a lot of adversity that they didn't see last season with such an easy schedule.
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring that up because there's a lot of tough teams in there. But if you were to quantify it into just one team that you were the most worried of in that stretch, I think personally, from what you said, I would say the Dolphins, surprisingly, are what could be one of the harder teams to beat this upcoming year. But I'm curious to see, who do you think in that stretch is going to give you guys the toughest game, especially considering the way they play or maybe previous matchups, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the easy answer for me is going to be the 49ers. I think they're going to come in with a major attitude of they're going to want to punch the Eagles in the face after the very unfortunate series of events that happened in the NFC Championship. Obviously, Deebo Samuel is not handling it very well and has been very active about it on social media. But not only that, they're most likely going to be the 2 best teams in the NFC, and the 2 eyes are on them, and this is their first chance to have a showdown since that championship game, and it could define who gets home field in the championship game should they both return. And so I think it's going to be not only an important game for this season, but it's going to be physically a very tough game for them.
Had you considered that the Kansas City Chiefs and the Washington Commanders were the only teams to beat a fully healthy Philadelphia Eagles team with Jalen Hurts under center? Did that come into consideration in your analysis at all?
It does. And again, that came down to both those teams just beat them up front, and I think the Eagles are going to game plan around that. Commanders game is going to be very important, and it's always going to be a tough one as the Eagles have, I think, at least a few-year stretch of losing to the Commanders in Washington. But the Chiefs one, I think it'll be a good game, but it's not going to be an ultimate defining factor for seeding and all that, AFC versus NFC. I think it'll be a matchup. They're both going to try to win, but it's just not going to have the same oomph as playing an NFC East versus NFC team would have.
Jets as well, who knows what that's going to look like this year either, that's a huge question mark, I'd say. So who knows what that'll look like, and that's in a way as well, but not too far away for you. So you'll still have some folks there.
Yeah, Eagles played Aaron Rodgers last year as well with the Packers, and unfortunately he had to leave the game. So I think this will be Aaron's chance to come back without an injury and give the Super Bowl contenders a run up for their money again.
Well, Brass, I gotta ask, and as is tradition in the NFC East, that the division winner has not repeated since, I believe, 2004. And I think the Eagles actually were the last team to do it back in that Donovan McNabb era. But listen to those words coming out of my mouth. Back in the Donovan McNabb era was the last time that a team in this division has repeated. And let's not forget that this is a division that sent 3 teams to the playoffs last year. And in addition, the Commanders, although we didn't make the playoffs, we went 500 and 8-1 record, and we're in position to be in the playoffs late in the year. So, it being a pretty tough division and knowing that history is not on your side, do you think that the Eagles realistically will come out on top again in the NFC East?
I mean, it really is NFC Beast. This is the division to be right now in the NFC with all the talent, and especially young talent on all 4 teams. But, I'm not very superstitious and don't believe in curses. And the Eagles rosters are set up to have another successful season. So I think, if any, this is a year that the Eagles can finally break this curse and once again win back-to-back NFC East division titles. However, I do think the Cowboys have a chance. They got a lot of good elements on their defense. I just don't believe in their offensive pieces. I don't believe in the Brandon Cooks makes them a top 2 wide receiver trio or any of that stuff. We'll see how it goes. I'm more of a Cooper Rush believer than a Dak Prescott fan in my personal opinion.
Yeah, we're definitely a Cooper Rush truthers podcast here over at Going Commando.
Well, him and Steven Montez, obviously the real truth of the NFC East. Now, Brass, I am kind of interested in this. I heard before the podcast that you may or may not have some questions for us. I'm a little bit worried at what the Eagles fan is going to throw at us here. And for the first time ever, they won't be throwing D-cell batteries at us. So I think that'll be a nice turn of events here. So I'm curious, what are these questions that you got for us?
Now, I feel like as of right now, where the 4 teams in the NFC East stand, Commanders are right now probably looking at the number 4 spot. So what moves do they have to make before week 1 that's going to help elevate them above the Giants or push them to hit that number 1 spot in the NFC East?
I think that's an interesting question. I would just start by saying I don't think that they're going to make any moves. I think this ownership group is really hesitant to touch them this first year. One, because they don't want to make it look like it's their fault. And I'm not saying that anything this season would be their fault. They've been given the cards they've been dealt. And there's very little that they can do to shift those pieces around. Now, I would say if we were going to try and compete, I think it would start in the tight end and linebackers rooms. Now, obviously, we did a lot to address that in the draft with the linebackers. We did draft 2 of them. But the tight end room is going to be the spot where I think we are going to either sign a guy or draft someone within the next year, hopefully. And that's not even to start with the quarterback situation, which at this point is so fluid, it might as well be water. Because you could see Sam Howell playing the first 6 games, and if things don't go right, Brissett hasn't looked terrible. However, terrible is a pretty low bar. So I think that if you're going to start, you address those 2 positions, but quite honestly, nothing is going to be touched until that ownership feels like it becomes their team, and maybe until they even wipe the head coaching slate clean.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Tom. I don't think there's going to be any major moves barring injury, knock on wood, but I think they're pretty happy with the roster as it is. I think they're actually going to be sad to be letting go of a lot of guys that are on the bubble here that probably will find other homes on other teams, or at least a good chunk of them. Um, but I think it really comes down to our defense is largely there. I mean, we have our hiccups, we have our issues, but it really rests on the shoulders of Sam Howell and the offensive line. We've got the offensive playmakers. I think, arguably, I would say that we have, wide receivers and a running back room that can contend with, the good, a majority of the good teams, in the NFL. So I think it really will come down to Sam Howell. I've really liked what I've seen of him so far. But there's going to be lumps, no doubt, as there are with any young quarterback. You almost have to kind of see this as his rookie season. Yeah, he was on the team all last year, but very limited starting experience. But I do really like Sam Howell. He seems like he's really kind of even keel, which you don't really see in a young quarterback too often. He's pretty calm and collected back there, and so far seem to make good, accurate, strong throws. So I think it's Sam Howell. Like, I think that's what's been keeping, and I think Clark and Tom will agree. That's what's been keeping this franchise back for so many years is we don't have a franchise quarterback that we can lean on to lead the offense, lead the team, and us as fans put trust in. So I'm very interested to see how this shakes out.
And let me throw this in as well. Interesting verbiage in that question, pitting us as the fourth team in this division.
Someone had to bring that up.
In my opinion, I think that you see the Giants take a step back. I mean, that was a team that how many one possession games did they win? How many games did they sneak by like pretty bad teams? I think they're just a good coached team that over exceeded because they're well coached. I don't know that you see the ball bounce their way as many times as it did last season in some of those games. Let's also not forget that they may or may not have beaten us on a botched pass interference call, but I digress.
I can agree with that. I'm not a huge believer in Daniel Jones or the signing of Darren Waller. I think Darren Waller might have his best years behind him, and I just don't think Daniel Jones is the answer. I think it was the right move, but I don't think it's a great move in general. Then Chris kind of brings up a point of you have a really good running back room, kind of resting on the shoulders of a young quarterback. A young QB has two best friends. The first, the offensive line, and Commanders might not have that. The second's an all-star running back. So Tom mentioned not wanting to make any big splashes with new ownership, but should they be giving a call to Indianapolis here to the Irsay family?
Hey, last time we did that, it didn't really work out too well for us. So I'm kind of traumatized by the last package we got from Jim Irsay.
Yeah, surprised it took this long into the podcast for a Wentz reference.
Well,
Tried to forget about him.
Exactly. It's a situation which we have PTSD for, so thank you for that. However, I will say that this is a team where the idea of a bell cow back has never really existed. You have guys like Chris Thompson back in the days who would have been your receiving back. He would have even been there for blocking on passing plays. You see guys like Silas Red, Adrian Peterson, like these guys who just kind of make their impact for one or two seasons and then maybe they aren't on the roster anymore. Right now, Brian Robinson looks like a guy who's going to be on this team for the next 5 years. Antonio Gibson has struggled, but honestly, with the new coordinator being who he is and wanting to throw it as a running back, you see a lot more opportunity for that rotational system to occur. So, I mean, unless this guy is like a real Matt Jones or someone who can just run the ball downhill and take up 30 snaps a game, which I don't personally think Jonathan Taylor is. He's maybe good for 20 a game if you're trying to avoid injuries. I don't think you see us making that call, and I don't think we also the small part. I don't think we have anything they would be interested in besides draft picks, and that's really where a large amount of our value is going to be for the next 3 years.
I guess the last question I have for the Commanders is you have a very unique and rare opportunity with new ownership that you are actually eligible to rebrand yet again. Do and should the Commanders rebrand? And if so, what do you want the name to be?
I'm gonna steal this one from Clark really quickly because I have a feeling I know where he's gonna go, and I would naturally like to agree with Clark. However, I feel like we've gotten to a point of no return with this. So I will say one of the first ideas I really had when this entire thing caught up is that, you kind of want something alliterative. You want something that invokes, strength, maybe even the franchise's history a bit. And one of the things I did really like was the idea of the Washington Warriors being our name. I mean, it's a name that's synonymous with winning in the NBA. It's a name that's alliterative. I think honestly, you could have gone back to the old logo and kept the logo with that name. Um, but at this point, I mean, I would hope that we kind of stay with the Commanders. I mean, we've chosen this path. It kind of almost looks like a worse move organizationally to me if we take a step back. However, I understand the fans that don't agree with me there. So
Consider this though. The name of the Washington Commanders is the last stain of the Dan Snyder era. And he got in that change right before he had to, he got out and sold the team for his lasting mark on this franchise. And I think if we really want to erase everything from the Snyder era, I think they need to change the name again. If you poll fans in DC, I think a large majority of them would say that they weren't in favor of the name. In fact, it wasn't even one of the really finalist names that were given to some season ticket holders. Actually, there's a committee that some individuals are on. We may know an individual that was on this committee, and he said that the Commanders wasn't even one of the final names. It was just an easy check mark that Dan Snyder could put in that so he didn't have to pay trademark or pay someone else for the rights to a better name because it was available. So it was just a cheap and easy fix, and he just stuck that in there before he was on the way out. So I think that the name, what Tom was referencing, of course, we've seen all of the noise about, the petition and things like that to bring back the Redskins name. I mean, that's not going to happen. That's never was going to happen. And, all those people signing that petition, you're not going to make a difference. But what I do think the name should be changed to is the Washington Red Hogs. Keep the HTTR that way. And Hogs, of course, call back to the history of the franchise.
Yeah, I would like that, Clark. That would be a good change. I'm open to a change. I understand kind of what Tom is saying too as well though about, hey, we already went through this whole rebrand once, like why kind of do this whole song and dance again? And it's not a surefire thing we'll get it right, just because we're doing it again, a second time, right? But I'd be open to it, just kind of like you said, Clark, to kind of rinse our hands of all things Snyder. And yeah, obviously we all grew up, Tom and Clark and myself grew up Redskins fans and, have fond memories of those days, of course, but it'll definitely be, it would not be that. It would be something new if it were to change. And, whatever it ends up being, it just needs to be something that is a little bit more tangible, I think, than Commanders, something that, you can get kids excited about, you can do a little bit more with from a marketing perspective as well. Commanders is just a little, there's just not a whole lot that you can do with it. And I know they've done the whole Major Tutty thing as the mascot, which, I don't hate, but, I just think that there was a lot more left on the table there for a rebrand that they could have done and they didn't do. So I would not be opposed at all to another rebrand.
What does a Commanders plushie look like? Is it like a little George Washington?
There
or-
isn't one. That's the problem. It's just gonna be they panicked and were like, oh yeah, pig. Here's a hog like in a army helmet. Deal with it.
Yeah, Brass, one of the things that we've gotten used to with a past ownership being what it was, I won't say his name, but the man who sold his soul for $6 billion, according to him, is that this team doesn't get things right immediately. And quite honestly, in the recent past, they don't get it right the second time either. Um, I I think that when you look at this team, I think from an outsider perspective, I think one thing that really helps to understand things is that this team is dysfunctional as all hell. It always has been. And at this point, I think a lot of us are worried that it always will be. But we're hopeful as ever, especially this season, and the love and passion of the fans seems to be at least somewhat reignited with the new ownership. So I think that's really the way that you should look at this as an outsider, is that we're a team that messes up a lot and we don't even fix our mistakes well. But there's never been a more hopeful time in recent history since RG3 probably than now.
You better believe we are holding our left hands up high in the air, strong and proud, left hand up.
Not to bring it back to the
You know,
Eagles, but are you all terrified that they're going to trade for Jonathan Taylor?
no, and I was gonna make a quick note about this. I mean, DeAndre Swift, you just trade for him. You have a pretty solid backfield already of guys who have been in the offense a while. The only way you get this move done is you get rid of some depth, and I don't think that you guys are really looking to get rid of that, especially considering that your depth is your young guys. And they're asking a high price tag, and maybe you guys give up the first rounder, but honestly, if you guys don't commit to winning this year, and if you guys don't make it, that first round is going to be a big loss for you guys.
No, yeah, I mean, if I were the Eagles, actually, I would trade that first round pick, maybe throw in another, honestly. And while they're at it, why don't you, I don't know, you could toss in like yeah, he's not your bet, Devontae Smith, not your best receiver, toss him in there too. Just, maybe spice up the
Mid.
deal. I don't know. I think that would be beneficial for you guys.
I mean, sweeten the pot with Jalen Carter while you're at it. You don't have any film on the guy. You don't know what he's going to do. He could be terrible. So, I mean, just make the deal more appealing.
If they do make the deal, I think Quez Watkins is involved in that trade. And I think there's a chance Rashad Penny's in there as well. Maybe then with a later round draft pick.
There's some great names there. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they do make that trade. And listen, you get these things right, then you heard it here first on the Going Commando podcast.
Well, that about does it here at the Going Commando podcast. We'd like to extend a huge thank you to our special guest, Eagles insider Brass. It was fantastic chopping it up with you tonight. And, we would love to have you back on, throughout the season.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I can't wait for week 5. Potential for seeing Mr. Clark Boynes at the game for week 5. So that is to be determined.
Yeah, people sleep on that. There may be, some live Going Commando podcast content from that game, but nonetheless, Brass, thank you for joining the show. And for all of us at Going Commando, for my co-hosts Tom and Chris, my name is Clark, and we'll catch y'all next time. And as always, HTTR and HTTC.